Oh, hi, I'm Josh, and I'm so grateful that you've joined me for the mid-year freakout tag. Ah! So how about all these booktubers who are doing their mid-year freakout tag at the beginning of June, and then all those other booktubers who are like, oh, my FOMO, I must do mine now too. And that's not a mid-year freakout tag, that's a 5/12 of the way through the year freakout tag. But anyways, I still love watching you anyways. Keep up the good work. What's with the freakout though? Why is everyone freaking out? I think it might have something to do with the fact that a lot of booktubers will set goals for the number of books they read in a year. Like, I'm going to read 1,000 books this year. And then they get to the end of June and go, oh wait, I've only read 200 books. It's time to freak out. I don't know, I don't set goals for myself or for my reading. Reading is where I go to just relax, to get away, to enjoy myself. So I don't want to add any stress to that whole activity by setting goals about the number of books I should read or anything like that. So there's no freaking out here. It's all chill, it's all good. I wasn't even going to do this tag because I don't read a lot of books in a year, let alone in half a year. But the wonderful Steph from Steph's Bookish World encouraged me to do it anyway. So with her encouragement, I've decided to sit down and do this particular tag. Now, when I started to look at it, I realized I'm actually doing really well with books read this year in comparison to the past few years. I've been tracking my reading since I started this YouTube channel in late 2017. And so when I look at 2018 through 2021, I see that in 2018, I read 7 books for the whole year, not very many. In 2019, I read 10, but 7 of those 10 books were the Harry Potter series that I read to my older boy, and the other 3 were just books for me. So in that whole year, I really only read 3 books for myself. In 2020, I read 9 books, although 3 of those were the Mistborn trilogy, so it was basically Mistborn plus 6 other books. And in 2021, so far, the first half of the year, I've actually read 7 books, which in comparison to previous years, as you can see, is close to what I might read in a full year. So I'm doing pretty well so far in 2021. I do need to make a video on the most recent book I've read still, but the other 6 I have each made a video for if you want to check them out individually. Another interesting stat to note before I jump into the questions is the fact that I have not read a really top-tier 5 out of 5 books since 2017. I have to go all the way back 4 years to find a couple of my favorite books. One of those top-tier books was Days Without End by Sebastian Barry, which is the best historical fiction book I've ever read. And then there was the Fiona of Our Tapestry by Guy Gavriel Kay, which was the best high fantasy trilogy I've ever read. So those were back in 2017, and since then, I haven't been hitting any really great 5 out of 5 books, unfortunately. And that leads me into question number 1, which is the best book I've read so far this year. Now, we got to go back to Guy Gavriel Kay for this book, and the book is Tigana, which is a standalone fantasy epic. It's a big 800-page book, and it's about as epic a book as you can get without getting into duology or trilogy levels of stuff. As a standalone, it is quite a story, and it was an excellent book. It wasn't top tier 5 out of 5. I haven't hit that again with this one, but Tigana is so far my favorite book of the year. Question 2 is the best sequel I've read so far this year, and this year I have not read any sequels. For the last sequel I read, I have to actually go back to 2020 when I read the Mistborn trilogy, and I found that the Mistborn trilogy was okay for me. It wasn't actually good enough for me to actually keep the physical books. I donated them to a thrift shop. But it was an okay experience that I felt was kind of ruined by an ending that was really over the top, that really jumped the shark in my opinion. So even with Mistborn, I can't really say that those sequels were particularly awesome. At the moment, I'm reading a trilogy called the Lycanius Trilogy by James Islington, starting with a book called The Shadow of What Was Lost. And so far, I'm enjoying the story. The writing is pretty bad. So many adverbs, James. We get it. We understand what's going on. We understand how it's happening, James. Enough of the adverbs already. But The story itself is keeping me interested, and I imagine that I will dive into the sequel for this one called An Echo of Things to Come once I'm finished it up. I'm not sure. I'm only a couple hundred pages into a 700-page book, so we'll see how it goes. But I expect I'll continue with the series after I'm finished The Shadow of What Was Lost, and we'll see how it goes from there. Question 3 is a new release that I haven't read but want to. And for this one, we're going to go to an author that I have not read any of his books. The author is John Gwynne. He wrote a 4-part fantasy series called The Faithful and the Fallen that is pretty high on my TBR list. I haven't gotten to those books yet, though. And now that he's completed The Faithful and the Fallen, he's working on another series called Of Blood and Bones that looks really intriguing to me. The Faithful and the Fallen apparently was based on Celtic history and mythology, and I believe that Of Blood and Bone is based on Norse mythology and history. So that is something that is of high interest to me, and I imagine that when he's finished writing that series that I'm going to dive in and give it a shot. Well, hopefully I'll get to The Faithful and the Fallen before I get to that series. I don't like to start a series before an author has finished one. I was burned by the Kingkiller Chronicles, Patrick, and I'm not going to start a series that isn't completed yet, but when Of Blood and Bone is finished, I imagine I'll get to that. Question 4 is the most anticipated release for the second half of the year. And I'm not somebody who tracks releases. I don't keep up with the latest and greatest thing. I just tend to read what I feel is going to work for me, what has good reviews already. So that tends to lead me towards more established books that already have lots of ratings and lots of praise. So I'm not one to follow the hot newness. So instead, I'll talk about something I'm anticipating reading next after I get through the Licanius trilogy, and that is Frank Herbert's Dune. One of my viewers, as well as a couple of booktubers that I've been watching, have convinced me that I need to give at least the first book in the Dune series a try. And so that's next up on deck after I'm finished the current trilogy that I'm working through, and hopefully I'll enjoy it as much as other people have. Question 5 is the biggest disappointment so far this year, and that one definitely goes to The Shadow of the Torturer, which was the first of a 4-book series by Gene Wolfe, again a fantasy series. And as I said in the video that I made about the books, I just found them to be weird and confusing and almost nonsensical in a way. It's kind of hard to describe, but it was certainly a very strange book. I definitely didn't enjoy it enough to continue reading the other 3 books in the series. I basically decided that these 4 books would get donated as well, which is too bad because I had heard that it was a very excellent fantasy series, so obviously it didn't hit with me. Based on comments I've received to my video, I know that others have really enjoyed it, so don't necessarily just take my word on that. It's just one that didn't strike my fancy. Question 6 is the biggest surprise of the year, and this one is going to go to a novel that was a surprise in how kind of mediocre it was, as opposed to how great it was, and that is Stephen King's Joyland. This is the very first Stephen King novel I've ever read. I mean, it's kind of mind-blowing at this point in my reading history to have not read a Stephen King book yet, but I read Joyland and thought it was okay-ish. It certainly didn't blow me away. Now, I understand that this isn't one of King's top-tier titles, that there are a lot of King books that I'm sure you're yelling at my computer right now saying, you gotta read this or that, whatever his famous books are. But Joyland surprised me with its mediocrity. Question 7 is favorite new author, either a debut author or someone who is new to me. In this case, it's going to be a new to me author because this is a very prolific writer named Jim Butcher, and he wrote a book called The Aeronaut's Windlass, which is the first in a series called The Cinder Spires. So far, it's the only book in the series that has been released. I gave it a read, and I found it to be just a very fun book. It didn't blow me away by any means. I didn't think it was outrageously great or anything, but I just found it to be an enjoyable steampunk adventure romp. And so as far as authors that are new to me, I'm going to go with The Aeronaut's Windlass for this pick. Before I go on with the other questions here, I just want to take a really quick second to let you know that this video is brought to you by my patrons. I want to extend a very big thank you to my higher tier patrons, Joanna and Paul, and My patron Mojo Dam recently increased his pledge to a higher tier, so that was a wonderful surprise to get. And so this time I want to extend a special thank you to Mojo Dam for increasing that pledge and just being so generous with your support for me. Thank you so much. Question 8 is your newest fictional crush. This question is hard for me. My heart was broken into a million unrepairable pieces when my wife left me early last year. And so crushes aren't something that has been on my mind. But just to play along here with the question, I guess if you wanted me to fall in love with your female protagonist, I would say if it was a strong lady who on the outside has muscles and tattoos and is a tough woman, but on the inside has a very kind heart and a gentle soul, then that's the type of character I could definitely crush on. Unfortunately, I can't give you any specific examples for this question, so we'll move right along to number 9, which is your newest favorite character of the year. For this one, I'm going to go back to The Aeronaut's Windlass by Jim Butcher, and I'm going to pick the character of Raoul. Now, Raoul is a cat, and in this book, there are a few characters who have the ability to speak cat, the language of cat. And so they are able to communicate with Raoul in the cat language. And so Raoul, as a character, in every way acts like a cat, but has this extra ability to communicate with a few humans. And it's just such a fun choice and makes for an interesting character. And although I'm deathly allergic to cats, I do admit that I love watching those live YouTube channels that are just 24-hour cameras of kittens that a couple of different rescue organizations do. They just have the cameras on these rescue kittens 24 hours a day, and I do, especially in the past year with all I've been through, I've spent quite a lot of time just sitting there enjoying watching kittens play. So Raoul the cat is my favorite character of the year so far. Question 10 now is a book that made you cry. Now, I'm not somebody who sheds tears to books necessarily. If you want to get me to cry, put on a YouTube playlist of adoption surprises. If you don't cry at that, you are a damned robot. But a book that definitely depressed the hell out of me was The Kite Runner by Khaled Hosseini. My goodness, this book was depressing from beginning to middle to end. There was so little that was uplifting or redeeming about it. I list it as one of the worst books I've ever read through to completion because of it. But again, if you want to hear my more detailed thoughts, you can check out the video I made about it recently. On the flip side of that is question 11, a book that made you happy. And once again, I'll go back to Jim Butcher's The Aeronaut's Windlass. Because it was just such a whimsical steampunk adventure with Raoul the cat and these other fun things going on, it was just a fun book. It wasn't a book that'll blow you away. It didn't have a lot of deep philosophical things to say. It was just a lighthearted adventure story. And so while it didn't necessarily fill me with happiness, it was one that was an enjoyable read, and so that'll be my pick for this question. Number 12 is the most beautiful book you've bought so far this year or received. And I'm going to go back to James Islington's The Shadow of What Was Lost. I just think that's a gorgeous cover there. It evokes an interesting fantasy adventure. And then if I do enjoy it enough to continue with the other 2 books in the series, I know that the 3 of them are going to look great together. It's just a really nice looking cover in my opinion, and one that evokes some excitement as I look at the characters on the front and wonder what they're getting up to. Finally, question 13 is what books do you need to read by the end of the year? And going back to my lack of goals, I gotta say, there's nothing I need to read. I'm just gonna enjoy the books as I go through them, and I'm gonna read what I read. No pressure, it's all good, it's all fun. So instead, I'll just talk about my upcoming TBR, what books are on deck next. And if you watched a couple of months ago the video I made about a mini book haul and my TBR list, this particular TBR is gonna look very different from that one. what I've realized when I was looking back over these past few years, and just the fact that I haven't had a 5 out of 5 book since 2017, I realized maybe I haven't been doing the best job of picking great books. There are a number of series that I've started and just haven't finished, like those Gene Wolfe books, for instance. And so I went back to take a really close look at my TBR and did quite a lot of research on Goodreads, actually, and really kind of rearranged the priority list of books that I want to get to in the hopes that I'm going to hit something great again. So I'm going to name 4 series that, after I get through the Lykanius trilogy and then read the first book of the Dune series, one of these series are going to be next up on deck, and maybe you can help me out by leaving comments below if you are familiar with any of these series to let me know if you think I might enjoy them. The most likely candidate for being next up in my reading order is the 6 books in the 7 Waters series by Juliette Marillier that starts out with a book called Daughter of the Forest. It just looks like a really fun fantasy, slightly fairy tale-ish setting that might draw me in potentially. The next most likely option is the Powder Mage trilogy by Brian McClellan, and the first of those 3 books is called Promise of Blood. It's a book that Lena keeps talking very highly of, and so she's convinced me to put it very high on my TBR list, and that might end up being the next one I read. Oh, I didn't mention that the Powder Mage trilogy is also fantasy, but kind of flintlock fantasy, I guess. So it's kind of fantasy in the age of gunpowder, as far as I can tell. Now, the next one here I mentioned previously, and that's The Faithful and the Fallen, a 4-book series by John Gwynne that starts out with a book called Malice. That is something that certainly has me interested as far as another kind of high fantasy series. But John Gwynne's The Faithful and the Fallen is more kind of medieval epic fantasy. As I said, it's very Celtic inspired, I believe. And then the 4th option that I could get to next is this tome that I picked up recently, and that is The Books of Earthsea, the complete illustrated edition by Ursula K. Le Guin. I mentioned that the writing of the Lykanius trilogy is actually fairly bad, but I know that the writing in Earthsea is going to be good. Whether the story captures me as much, I don't really know, but at least I do own this particular book, and it's ready to go on my shelf here. So if you're familiar with any of these 4 series, please do let me know in the comments how you think I should prioritize these series. And that's it for this tag. Like I said, it's been a good year for reading for me. I've been doing more reading than I have been in the past several years. I will continue to make videos about every single book I read, although I'll likely wait till I complete the entire Lykanius trilogy before I make a video about that one, unless I don't enjoy the first book enough to continue with the rest of the series, in which case I will just make a video about the first book. So as a result, it might be quite a while before I make my next video about a specific book as I read through this gigantic trilogy. And as always, I'm just grateful that you take the time to watch my videos. In fact, I'm curious about people who actually watch through to the end of my videos. I know that YouTube stats show that most people will only watch the first few minutes of a video, so if you actually watch the whole thing, just comment, like leave the word completed as a comment below this video to let me know that you've actually watched the entire video and that at least somebody is engaged enough to watch the whole thing. So I appreciate you, and I'll see you again soon. Hey, it's Josh. You know why I'm here. Sometimes you just need that friendly reminder to give a little thumb up, subscribe to the channel, to share the video with somebody who would enjoy it. Thanks so much for watching. Cheers. You gotta wait till the end of the June to hit mid-year. I expect I will come back to this, and he's working oops, and so that'll be my, and one that the most likely candidate for the next up. So it's fantasy with what you think I should do about, I don't know, and that people are engaged